All right, welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving straight into one of the most sudden, pivotal geopolitical shifts we've seen in a while, the incredibly sharp de-escalation between the USA and Iran. Seriously, how do two major global powers step right up to the absolute brink of war and then just step back? Well, we're going to break down exactly how we went from highly dangerous, rapidly rising tensions to a sudden ceasefire. We'll look at the specific actions that pushed things to the edge, the global shockwaves that followed, and what experts are saying actually needs to happen next.
Think about this for a second. What if two powerful nations were standing right on the edge of a massive war, and then, out of nowhere, just agreed to stop? Because that is the exact situation the world just watched unfold. For days, everyone was holding their collective breath as tensions between the US and Iran reached a remarkably dangerous level. We weren't just looking at some minor diplomatic disagreement. This was two heavily armed nations on the precipice. And then, almost as fast as those tensions spiked, both sides announced a ceasefire. It's a fascinating geopolitical whiplash.
To truly get why the ceasefire is such a massive relief, we really have to understand the gravity of the buildup. This wasn't just politicians trading insults behind podiums. We are talking about concrete military actions and physical missile strikes hitting actual targets. And when you couple those physical strikes with severe, very public ultimatums from both sides, you get a recipe for sheer volatility. It created immediate, real-world uncertainty for millions of people and raised intense fears across the entire Middle East and, frankly, the rest of the globe.
Because here's the thing, when heavyweights clash, the shockwaves absolutely do not stop at their borders. We saw immediate ripple effects hit global infrastructure, oil prices spiked, and global financial markets were rattled practically overnight. A conflict like this threatens the very energy supplies that keep the global economy running. Because of all that overarching uncertainty, billions of dollars can shift in a matter of hours. So while this started as a regional dispute, it instantly became an economic and political crisis for the entire world, throwing international diplomacy into absolute high gear.
But while those missile strikes were rattling the markets and dominating the headlines, something else was happening completely out of sight. At the absolute peak of the tension, when fears of a wider war were at their worst, international diplomacy went into overdrive. This is the crucial counterbalance we have to talk about. Highly pressurized, behind-the-scenes efforts, often relying on back channels and neutral third parties just to relay messages, actually worked. In a matter of hours, these intense diplomatic maneuvers successfully pulled both sides back from the edge and led to the sudden announcement of a pause.
Now, words matter incredibly in geopolitics, and the specific word announced to the world was ceasefire. Let's be really clear about what that actually means. A ceasefire is simply an agreement by both sides to temporarily stop fighting. I really want to emphasize that word, temporarily. It's a physical pause. It means the military actions stop and the missiles stay on the ground. The whole goal of this temporary stop is vital to prevent further violence and protect civilian lives. It literally hits the pause button on the destruction so everyone can just take a breath.
We do have to draw a very clear line here, though, between a pause and an actual resolution. Yes, a ceasefire is absolutely vital. It stops the missiles. But permanent peace? That is a completely different, far more complicated beast. Moving from a temporary stop to lasting peace means you have to shift away from just managing a crisis and start actively building trust. You can mandate a ceasefire with a single order, but you absolutely cannot mandate permanent peace. That requires stepping off the battlefield and committing to some very grueling negotiations. This is exactly why geopolitical experts are pointing out that lasting peace depends entirely on continued negotiations and trust between both countries. The really heavy lifting actually begins right now. It demands ongoing, difficult, and probably very slow diplomatic work. We're talking about two nations that were just on the brink of war somehow having to sit down and painstakingly build a foundation of trust from scratch. Without those two crucial pieces, sustained negotiations and genuine trust, the ceasefire is really just a fragile pause that could shatter at any second. So, where does all of this leave us today? Well, honestly, the future remains pretty uncertain. The tensions were historically high, those global impacts were incredibly real, and that vital trust we just talked about, it still needs to be built. But, and this is the major takeaway here, diplomacy has bought us time. Even with all this remaining uncertainty, this diplomatic pause has opened a very real window of opportunity. It gives both sides the breathing room they desperately need to avoid a much wider, far more devastating conflict. It is a fragile chance, for sure, but it is a chance.
We've seen exactly how fast things can escalate to the absolute edge, and we've seen how intense diplomacy can suddenly pull nations back into a ceasefire. But as we know, a pause is not peace. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Can diplomacy actually create lasting peace between the USA and Iran? Can continued negotiations really bridge the gap that just led to missile strikes and global shockwaves? How that question gets answered is going to shape the future of the Middle East, and really the entire world. Thank you for joining me for today's Explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.